Hello, I've had this FX79 Buffalo 2-meter flying wing for a few weeks now, and I had a few little issues with it along the way. Overall it's a really good wing, I really like it. It's quickly become one of my favourite planes. And right now though I have got it into a pretty good state. I've changed a few things on it and it's what I consider to be quite a nice build at the moment. So I thought I might just show you what things I've changed since I first flew it, and maybe might help some other people out, I don't know. Probably the first tip that I would give is to change that battery plate. The one in the kit was only about half that size and it just didn't offer enough stick, especially with hot glue. I found battery just pulled out in a sort of a situation where the wing ended up going like that and the battery just pulled out. So what I've done there is I've made my own one. It's a single piece of plywood and it's about twice the size, and I'm using Gorilla Glue there, as you can see at the puffing up at the front. And that's sticking nicely, and it lets me get 2 straps on the battery, so I thought this is quite important. I've been using 4S 10,000 milliamp hour batteries, so they're pretty big and they need to be stuck down nicely. Probably the next thing that you might like to do, and I've had a few questions about this, and that is the reinforcement for the wingtips, which were flexing a lot. So the spar finishes about here, and I did a video earlier where I put a camera on here and we could see the wingtips flexing quite a lot, and it's only a problem at high airspeed, but it is quite a problem because it means that the plane will dive down quite quickly, and the only way you can get it out of that is to cut the motor and let it reduce the airspeed just from the drag of the air so that you can pull back out again, which is okay if you're flying it manually, but if the autopilot is flying it, I've found that it's unable to recover. So that could be a crash situation. Anyway, so I experimented with a couple of things. Well, actually only with one thing, but you can see this is the spar here, the original one just goes there, and after my huge wingtip flexing test, you can't really see it here, but you could see lots and lots of creases, so it's right at the tip of the spar where it was bending. So although it's not ideal, what I've done is I've put a 40 centimeter spar right from there where the wing piece joins on out to here, and actually goes under that ridge a little bit there, and I just glued that in with Gorilla Glue. It's a 10mm carbon fibre tube, and that is not going to flex anymore, though there is still a little bit of potential to flex at this join because that spar doesn't go through there, right? But I did another test with the camera on. I didn't really test it that much, but there's absolutely no flex whatsoever in this section now, and yeah, I think I'll just play the video now if I can find it, and I think there was maybe a tiny little bit of flex around this area, so it's not completely gone, but that made a huge difference to the problem, and now it's much harder to get it to do that nosediving at high speed. However, if you hold it at high speed for long enough, it does slowly start to nose down. As hopefully if I'm playing that video for you now, you'll be seeing that right now. So it's not completely gone, and I'm thinking that the remainder of the problem may just be to the fact that these elevons are quite large. So I don't know if you can get an idea how big that is from my hand and from the servo there. They're pretty big elevons, and I'm just thinking that maybe as the airspeed gets faster, this servo and the linkage and everything is just not able to handle holding the elevon in the right place. Yeah. However, I'm not going to try to fix it anymore because for one thing, it's not a problem in manual mode. If the human is flying it, you'll always be able to get out of it, no problem. It's only really a problem when the autopilot is flying it, and I think from what I've seen of how it behaves now, it takes so long to get into that nose down situation, and it comes on so gradually now that I think the autopilot will be able to, it won't get into a situation where that's going to happen, because I noticed that the only time it happened is when the plane was going downwind and then it turned around to come upwind, so all of a sudden it was facing a lot more forward airspeed than it was a moment ago, plus it raises the throttle to bank into the turn so it doesn't lose altitude. This is Arduplane, that is. And just a combination of those things and then suddenly hitting that forward airspeed was what was making it nose down. But because now it takes so long to get into that situation, I don't think it's going to be an issue. But I will keep an eye on it. And speaking of autopilots, of course, I didn't have this in originally either, but I have the Radiolink mini picks under there, and that has the power distribution module stuck on top of it. And I had these just stuck in with foam tape originally, but they pulled out in that crash that I said when my wing started going like that while I was doing the wing flex test. They all pulled right off. So what I've done is I've zip tied those down by just using a hot wire tool to make a small hole in the foam there, and that goes all the way around to the outside of the plane and back. And I did the same thing for the ESC, and I also did the same thing for the GPS, which is in there. Let me see if I can show you that. Can you see that? There we go. So I really don't want the GPS to be moving around either. So all of those are coming directly out to the bottom with zip ties like this, and they should be stuck in there pretty nice and solid. You can see the other zip ties over there, I think. And right down the back there I also used the hot wire tool to put a couple extra holes going out the back there to potentially, or hopefully, to get some extra cooling. So there's one in that corner. So this is where the warmer air is going to be, I think, around the ESC. So there's one hole there, and then there's another hole there just underneath the wire. So that goes to the outside. Not sure if it really helps, but hey, it's pretty easy to do, and it didn't ruin the structural integrity at all, I don't think, so might as well. Over here I've made this mod that a lot of people on YouTube were doing, which is a really good idea. And you just put some pieces of hard plastic into the edges there and cut a little groove, so that makes this easily removable. And I've put a hole in here for my Xiaomi Yi, and I don't have the foam pieces now, but I cut a few foam blocks so that it would just sit in there, and I found that it didn't need any further mounting. It just sort of, if you cut the foam just right, it'll squash in there quite nice and tight, and it'll just sit flat, because this surface here, I think, is pretty much flat to the ground when it's flying, so that's been quite good for taking aerial photos. I've only done a couple of missions. I didn't really buy this plane to do that, I just thought I'd try it since it's quite a good plane for it. And the hole for the Xiaomi Yi, or the whatever camera you have, I just cut that in there like that, and it fortunately it doesn't obscure the lens in any way, and it doesn't really create any drag, and when you land the camera is not poking out at all to be damaged or anything like that, so it's a really quite a good situation, and it was so easy to do. And the camera is not going to be connected to any of this stuff here to do the triggering of the shutter, but what I'm using is this ESP8266 Wi-Fi Arduino sort of thing, and you can see there it's got a servo cable coming out from the flight controller, which is going to be triggering that at certain points to take a photo, and then that's going to be telling the Xiaomi Yi to take a photo. So that's how that works. It's quite nice. This is a 2.4 gig frequency device, by the way, and I just remembered that I had this in there the whole time while I was flying out to 3 kilometers yesterday, and I didn't have any trouble, so I guess maybe it wasn't actually transmitting anything. Well, for whatever reason it wasn't a problem for radio reception, so that's good to know. What else have I done? Yeah, speaking of radio reception, I think this really helps. So yeah, yesterday morning I flew out to 3 kilometers, and I was able to do a full circle at 3 kilometers, and I didn't have any break in radio control at the 3 kilometer mark. Watching the video afterwards though, I noticed that there was about a half a second where it flipped into return to home on the way out at about 2.5 kilometers. So it must have been just on the edge of losing control at 3, I'd say. But now that I have a reliable autopilot in it, I might do a test one day where I just actually go out as far as it can and force it to return to home and see how far it gets. But anyway, that's my usual FSI A6B, and the transmitter was a FSI6. Oh, sorry, it's FSI6X was what I was using, but I think it's the same as FSI6, the actual radio module part of it. And yeah, that's a really good combination for $50. I haven't had any problems, or I haven't had any complaints, I should say. It's been performing quite well. The motor and the prop, when I first flew this, I said it seemed a little bit underpowered, but it's probably about right once you get used to the fact that this is a fairly slow plane. It never really goes that fast, and it's quite efficient. And what I have on there at the moment is a 12x6 prop, and I found that makes the motor a little bit warmer than I'd like, and it was overall a bit more comfortable with an 11x8 prop. The only reason I have the 12x6 on here now is because the 11x8 got broken, so I'm waiting for some more to arrive in the mail, but this one works fine. The motor being 800 kV is probably about right, actually. Originally I said that maybe a higher kV motor would be better, but for 4S obviously, I think the 800 kV in that size prop is not too bad. For RG-plane telemetry, I'm using one of these 900 megahertz radio antennas that came with the RTK GPS kit from U-Blox. They're quite nice antennas, so I thought I'd use these instead of the cheapy ones that come with the this radio module, which are probably kind of crap. So originally I had this over here, and I don't think that would have been contributing to my tucking at high speed problem, because it was fairly flat down. But in any case, to make everything a bit more slick, I bought a little extension cable, so that's just going through where the spar goes, and then it pops out here, and then it sits right on the front of that, oh not quite, but pretty much right on the front of that fin, so it's not really obstructing the airflow, so I quite like that. And this was also giving me no problems whatsoever at 3 kilometers distance, so I'm quite happy about that. What else have I done? I put FPV gear in here, finally. I don't know why it took me so long, because it's a lot of fun to fly FPV actually. So what I have in here is a 600 milliwatt transmitter with one of these, whatever that is, transmitters, and this also at 3 kilometers was giving me no problems. When I did my circle at 3 kilometers, it was a bit faded at some points, but for the most part I could see where I was going and everything. In fact, I had more problems just close by, going behind the trees and stuff, than I did at 3 kilometers, which is interesting. So the having a clear line of sight really makes a big difference. So up in the front there, it's a little bit hard to see, but I have a I tried a couple of FPV cameras here. Originally I had a Runcam Micro Eagle in there, and that had a bit of a problem in that it got way too hot. So if I turned everything on and then just took off immediately, it was mostly okay. But if I sat around for a few minutes getting organized, by the time I came to take off, it would be cutting out. It was sort of flickering white and everything, so it wasn't really good enough to fly with. And I actually found that when I came back to swap it out for this one, which is the Micro Sparrow, I'd found that the EPO had gotten that slightly singed feeling. You know how if you melt EPO it gets sort of hard and crusty? So I think the Micro Eagle had been getting really hot inside there. Anyway, the Micro Sparrow, that one there, it's a purple one, Micro Sparrow 2, sorry, that is not having any such problems, so it's quite good. And the way I've mounted it is just to cut cavity out each side in the same, it's basically symmetrical, it sits pretty much in the middle, so you just cut a piece out there. And for the HD camera, I have been using the Runcam 2, which is a great camera for this kind of thing. And likewise in here I just cut a cavity about half on each side. I'll show you a photo of that. I think I have a photo somewhere. And yeah, that's quite nice, because if you cut it just a tiny bit too small, you don't need any sort of Velcro or anything to mount the camera, and it's easy to get it in and out, because you can just, to get it out, you just push it from here, and to get it in, you just slide it all the way forward. And if you have skinny fingers like me, you should be able to just reach in there to press the button to start and stop the camera. If you do that, by the way, what you might find is that when you press the button to start the camera like that, the camera will tilt upwards, so you'll be looking up like this with your filming. So if you do that, after you've pressed the button to start filming, just remember to lift the back of the camera up so that it's actually pointing a little bit more downwards. And all of that FPV gear and everything is detachable like this, so I found this to be quite handy. So I leave it like that until just before I take off, so that I don't run the risk of the OSD or the FPV camera getting too hot. Oh, I didn't mention the OSD, but there is an OSD in there. Let's see if I can So just in that little hole there, approximately where the air goes in for here. Oh yeah, look at that. That's in a really good spot there. So it's going to be cooled, because this thing gets hot too. It's a micro minim OSD, and I could probably get rid of that tape a bit better. It's kind of blocking the path of the air, but yeah, we can see. And that was fairly easy to set up. Works reasonably well. And that's what this cord here is for. So that's going up to the OSD and then into the second telemetry plug on the flight controller. And I had to make a little cutout of this so that when everything's together it'll be like this. And it's all very sleek and slick and aerodynamic, so the only aerials that are really in the airflow are the FPV antenna and the radio control antennas, and they're not big airflow things, and I don't have any cameras sticking out on the top or anything like that. So I think it should be a fairly efficient build, and so far from what I've seen it has been. I got 68 minutes or 57 kilometers total distance from about half of a 4S 10,000 milliamp hour battery yesterday, so not too bad as far as efficiency goes. So I think that's all the tips that I have as far as physical construction and equipment goes. There are a couple of other things that I thought I might mention that are a bit more of a software configuration sort of thing. So one of them was that I've been doing almost all of my flying in fly-by-wire A mode on Arduplane, which is really good. And the way you tell the plane what level is you put it on the ground level, and then in the mission planner you click a button to say calibrate level. And the first time I did that, I just sat the plane down, obviously not on this kind of a surface, just on a proper flat surface inside the house. And I just let the plane sit normally, but all I did was balance it left to right and roll. And I just left the pitch to be whatever it was. And you can see even here it's pitching up a little bit. It wasn't pitching up that much, it was a bit more like that, I think. And I found that that gave me what I would call a fairly safe fly-by-wire A behavior, because when you take your hands off the sticks, at least at about half throttle, it would slowly climb. So it would climb about 1 meter every, I don't know, 15 seconds or something like that. Just a nice gradual climb, which I thought was quite nice because it meant I could just sort of take my hands off and take my eyes off the plane as well a little bit, and it wasn't going to, you know, gradually drive itself into the ground. And I thought it was a little bit more safe to err on the side of going up than try and keep it level, and that was pretty good. But what I might suggest, if you do actually want it to hold its level, is put a little bit of something soft under the tail. This is what I did afterwards. Just a little cushion or something like that to lift the tail a tiny little bit, and then do that calibrate level, and you might find that then fly-by-wire A will actually keep it at the same altitude. Although, like I say, it's not quite as safe to do that. All right, and the other thing, oh yeah, launching is what I wanted to talk about. So I found that, actually I recorded some video about this the other day that I might just put in here because I've already explained it, and I'll just show you that. While I'm here, I thought I might offer a couple of tips about launching this particular plane, or planes of this size, by hand launch when you're doing it by yourself. I thought about making a video specifically for this, but it's not really enough content, so I'll just throw it into this one. And I did quite a lot of practice, and I found, at the beginning I would throw it once or twice and it would go perfectly, and then the next time it would just be terrible. It would just flip over like that and crash into the ground. And so a couple of points that I've noted. One is throw it into the wind. Obviously that's what we should try and do with every plane. But I've noticed that with a smaller plane you can get away with throwing it a little bit crosswind or downwind or something. But because this one catches so much wind at even a low speed, it really, really helps to throw into the wind. So today there's almost no wind, but as soon as I can detect which way it's coming from, I think that way, yeah, that way, I will make sure to throw it in that direction, and that really, really helps, especially with this size, more than for a smaller plane. The second tip, which is maybe a little bit more useful, is look at the plane while you're throwing it. So normally what I'll do is I'll get the plane up here and I'll look at it while it's in my hand, and then I'll look over there somewhere over there, and I'll throw it like that while I'm looking over there. And it's not really necessary to look over there because you're not aiming for anything. It's not like you're playing baseball where you're throwing it to somebody to catch or anything over there. So you don't actually need to look over there. And I found that the problem was, as I looked away, because as I said, it catches quite a bit of wind, and you're holding it in a fairly narrow region here, your hand, or at least my hand, is not really dexterous enough or sensitive enough to detect that the plane is tipped a little bit like that one way or the other. And it's also not strong enough to correct it and hold it level. But I found that if I looked at my hand, looked at the plane, as I'm throwing it like this, then I can see every little deviation that it's making, and those deviations are fairly important because as it leaves your hand, you want to keep it nice, as flat and level as possible, so that you're getting all of the possible lift from the wing, you know, vertically rather than off to the side like that. So yeah, throw it like this and look at it. Yeah, look at it while you're throwing it. That's really helps, I've found. So as far as the actual throw is concerned, that's how I've been doing it, and it's been working quite well. I don't know if I mentioned there in that video, but you don't need to run to throw this. I see a lot of people on YouTube, they'll run and then they'll stop and they'll throw the plane. So the running is only useful if you keep running while you're throwing, but that's actually kind of difficult. So all I do is take a huge step forward so that the top part of my body is moving along. You don't need to actually be running. And actually did a really nice launch that Aileron captured on video, so I'll show you that as well. Anyway, that's how it works best for me. Now, as far as the control of the plane, what is the plane going to be doing while you're throwing? The way I do it is I hold this in my hand, and this transmitter's quite nice and thin, like that. So it's quite easy to hold it like this and then pump the throttle up like that. And there's no rudder, so even if you bump the stick like that, it doesn't really matter. So what I've been doing is I don't want this prop to be folding back like that. So what I'll do is I'll spin the motor just a small bit to make sure that the prop is splayed out like that, nice and straight, but not so much that it's actually giving thrust, because I don't want the plane to be pushing itself forward. I want to be throwing it forward because, as you can see, these props, these blades are pretty big, and I don't want it to hit my hand. So that's why I throw, and then with my other hand, I'll pump the throttle up like that. I had a few people say, why don't I try the auto launch feature, which lets you just do nothing basically on the transmitter, and you'll throw it and then the plane will detect that it's been thrown. I didn't really want to do that with this plane for a couple of reasons. One is that I don't really trust this to detect the accelerometer inputs correctly and the GPS correctly every time. It might have a false positive and decide that it's going to spin up the motor when you're not quite ready. Another thing is that you have to choose the direction, so you have to arm it facing the direction, and I quite often forget to do that, so it's another reason I didn't want to do it. And the other reason was, as I said, I wanted to have the prop spinning just a little bit before I throw, and there's no way to currently do that with auto launch. The prop is just going to be off, and I didn't want it so that if the prop was off and then I threw it and the prop went back like that, just from the throw, the force of the throw, maybe flick the prop back like that rather. It probably wouldn't, but I just didn't want to take those risks, so that's why I have not been using auto launch. But what I did figure out, or what I came up with, is a really good way that works for me, is to launch in fly-by-wire A mode, and this is always helpful because it will auto level the plane. But I did still have problems with this because I'd throw the plane and then I'd have to go like that with the left hand, which is fine because that's pretty easy, but then my right hand has to quickly come down here and pull back on the stick like that to make sure it's going to climb so that it doesn't hit the fence or the power poles. And when I did that, I quite often bumped this switch down into GPS, into return to launch mode, and it was just a bit nerve-wracking at that moment of launch to get it right. So what I figured I could do is use this other switch to add a mix so that when I flick this switch, it's effectively going to do that. But then I'll throw the plane and do my normal throttle up, and I don't have to touch this at all, and it's going to climb. And that has been working really, really well, and it gives me the best of all of the situations. So it's assisted launch, but it's not assisted to the point where I'm scared about the prop starting up by itself. And it also frees me up from having to panic and quickly trying to do something on here. And yeah, every time I've launched like that so far has been a winner. I'll just show you how this works here, display. Alright, so you can see that the pitch channel is channel 2, and this other switch that I'm using there is channel 6. And you can see that channel 6 is going to affect channel 2 to go fully down, or fully pitch back like that. So that's the result that you want, and you get that by come down to mixes. That's the mix there. So mix is on, master is channel 6, slave is channel 2, positive mix is minus 100%, and then negative mix is 0%. So that will give you this behavior that I've got there if anybody wants to try that. And I found that to be very, very helpful. So of course, once you're up at altitude, you would just switch that back off for the rest of the flight. Well, I guess it could be handy if you're flying along and you just decide that you want to climb steadily for a while. You could just flick that back on, and then the plane would climb on its own for a while. Yeah, anyway, I think I've come to the end of all my tips. Hopefully some of them were useful for somebody. Thanks for watching. It's a wrap. Hey. Hey, bye-bye. No. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. See ya.